Okay, so you remember Exodus chapter 20 were the 10 Commandments, and those are very specific, those 10. And then chapters 21, 22, and 23 are more of the civil laws, the things that are, you could say that they're an expansion or an amplification of the 10 Commandments themselves. So that's what we got into last week, and we're sort of picking up midway in that. It's 3 chapters, and we're starting off. So it does begin sort of abruptly because we're catching it mid-thought. But the very first verse here says, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So it starts right off getting into this issue of theft and really emphasizing that livestock theft or any kind of theft is something that really needs to have restitution or payment back for it. Today we don't have the level of accountability like they did then, but it's still in place, and this is a lot of the foundation for our judicial system in the first place. You remember back in chapter 15, I believe, that's when the judges were established, and that's sort of what we take this idea from, having to do with government and laws and the protections of the people with respect to government. So we come to this very first one where it starts to talk about theft, and it's about stealing an ox or a sheep and then to kill it or sell it, that he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Now, to us, that may seem like an arbitrary number, but to the Lord, it's the number that he gave. And the idea that if somebody were to steal one ox and then to kill it or to try to sell it, that there's a pretty hefty penalty that comes with that. The very fact that he's stealing in the first place, we would assume that they were in want. Maybe they're just trying to make a new lifestyle out of this by stealing and then stealing and selling. But when they're caught, then the punishment is pretty hefty here. So there's to restore 5 times for an oxen and 4 times for a sheep. And then it goes on in verse 2. It says, if a thief be found breaking up, or like breaking in to a house, and be smitten that he die, there shall be no bloodshed for him. So basically this is saying that if it is qualified based upon the next verse, but if this happens at night, somebody breaks in, a thief, and they're killed, then the person who has killed them, there's not going to be any sort of charges against them. Specifically, that would be like a second-degree murder. There's not going to be any death penalty for them because of what took place. Kind of makes sense, but even in our culture, we're starting to soften that a little bit as far as what's allowed for thieves to come in the middle of the night and to do this. But here we clearly see that he's smitten, that he died, that there be no bloodshed for him. Now, in verse 3, though, it says, if the sun be risen upon him, there shall be bloodshed for him, for he shall make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. So basically, if somebody comes in the middle of the day and steals, that there's actually a limitation here where you can't kill somebody if it's during the day. If it's in broad daylight, that you can maybe hold them at spear point or arrow point or rock point, whatever weapon you might have. Today we would say perhaps a gunpoint, but you can actually take life. And if you do, then you're actually guilty of murder at that point, and that you would be taken outside the camp and killed. So there is a death penalty if that occurs during the daylight. The intruder comes in, it's not justified to kill them. But then it goes on and he says, for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. So this sort of, the idea of what's the restitution? Well, he broke in, and that there's some level of restitution. For perhaps there's it could be the alarm of that break-in, or it could be if it resulted in a fight of some kind, that whatever the damages would be within the house, or the damages having to do with people. Let's say there was a fight that took place, and then somebody fell and injured one of the children in the house, or something along that line, that there's restitution that needs to follow through here. At the very least, you would have the restitution for the break-in. Now it says the break-in, like the physical break-in, like maybe breaking a window or a door or something along that line. Well, in those days, it was a tent, so you broke the tent peg or something like that, but there would be restitution, payment. Now, if the thief who came in didn't have money to pay, then they were sold actually into slavery at this point, which is pretty amazing here. So they make full restitution for whatever it would be that would have been broken, or they're actually sold into slavery, which is pretty harsh. The limitations that are in here, it's like any sort of law civilly that's established, that if the punishments are harsh enough, then that becomes a deterrent. In other words, if we know that there will be a swift judgment, and the consequence for murdering somebody is capital punishment, them being killed, then that functions as a deterrent. And so here we have theft. If you steal and you can't pay restitution at this point, then you're sold into slavery. So you need to, that's the deterrent. You just don't go there. You don't steal. If the theft be, this is verse 4, if the theft be certainly found, if the theft be certainly found in his hand alive, whether it be ox or ass or sheep, he shall restore double. So livestock specifically, that let's say they came in and they stole sheep and they're trying to walk out with it, and the person has a spear or an arrow or a rock and says stop, then their restitution at that point would be double. And the assumption after that is that if they can't pay, that they get sold into slavery. That's the consequence of it. So some pretty harsh things going on. One is the initial restitution for the break-in would be 1 for 1, but for livestock, then it's a double portion. So we get into property loss in the next 4 or so verses. So verse 5, if a man shall cause a field or vineyard to be eaten, and shall put in his beast, and shall feed in another man's field, of the best of his own field and of the best of his own vineyard shall he make restitution. So basically, you can't let your animal graze in someone else's field or start to eat off of the vineyard. And if that does take place, then it's the best of yours that goes to make restitution. In other words, you can't let the animal go grazing in, because you don't want your nice field to be eaten up, so you let them graze in that other person's field. Well, you've got to give the best of what was lost, because it would be assumed that the animal, there's no way to really argue this, but it would be assumed that the animal would have eaten the best. So you have to pay restitution for the best in that case. Verse 6, if fire break out and catch in thorns, so that the stacks of corn or the standing corn or the field be consumed therewith, he that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So fire breaks out, and it says that it catches on the thorn. Thorn bushes were frequently used as those are the property markers of that day. So let's say you've got, and it's crazy to think about this. These are guys out in the middle of the desert. They're traveling. So they may be thinking, what does this even have application to us? That we could have a place and then have a thorn bush up in order to even draw out property. But of course, this has the foresight to know that there is property that's going to be owned. And so if part of your the thorn bushes, or there's a fire that starts and that gets in and starts consuming the other person's field, and whether that corn has been harvested or the corn itself, or let's say they had a barn over there and it works its way over to burn down the barn full of corn, that it says here that he that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. And there's not even a question of whether it happened accidentally or not. I mean, it's clearly, if it's known arson, then it would be a bigger problem, and we'll get to that. But this is just, hey, it was an accident. It just happened, and full restitution for what was lost. So verse 7 goes on, and if a man shall deliver unto his neighbor money or stuff to keep, and it be stolen out of the man's house, or a thief be found, let him pay double. So when I read this, I'm reminded of the days back in Southern California. If you went to the beach specifically, you might have, your wallet or a purse and just some things with you. You have your blanket down, or a towel, a beach chair, and you've got the ocean out there. Waves are breaking. It's a sunny day. It's a wonderful time to go on out. And it wasn't uncommon. You would sit there a while and you just kind of look around to see, okay, who seems like a good person, or who's trustworthy and who doesn't seem that way. And then you would go to the trustworthy one and say, yeah, so I'm going to go on out into the water. Would you watch my stuff for me? And so it wouldn't just be shoes and shirts and things like that, but there would be some valuables that were there. So this is a little different situation, but it still remains that if you deliver something to your neighbor, and if it's money or stuff to keep, and it's stolen out of the man's house, if the thief's found, then that thief pays double. Okay, so they need to pay double. In other words, if somebody comes by, you say, hey, I want you to hold on to these things for me, and it's just like, okay, we're going to hold these things. We'll watch them while you're away, whether that's a beach towel in a wallet, or if it's something where, can I park my car here for a little bit of time, or park my horse or oxen here for a little bit of time, I'll be right back. Then if something's stolen, then it still is the responsibility of the person, unless they catch the thief. If they catch the thief, it's double. It's a double restitution for what was lost. So if it was money, if it was $100 in your wallet, then it's double. And you can just say, well, how do you know what was in there? It comes down to the person who just says, look, there was $100. They could say $1,000, whatever. But more than likely, they were before God in doing these things, and so as a result, it would be a double based upon at least the thief, because they would know what that actual amount was. But notice it says in verse 8, if the thief be not found, and the master of the house shall be brought unto the judges to see whether he hath put his hand unto his neighbor's goods. In other words, what this is saying is, if for some reason you've been given care of something, and then someone comes back and says, hey, where's my stuff? And then they go on to say, I don't have it. Well, you can't just say, well, sorry, I know I was supposed to watch this stuff, but I don't have it anymore. You can't. That's not an alibi. You don't get the out there. So basically what you need to do, the two of you go before the judges here, and specifically it says that if the thief not be found, in other words, the supposed thief, maybe the thief is the guy you had watch your stuff. That's what this is saying. So you don't know. So because you don't know if somebody's trying to rip off his neighbor, or if it's legitimately stolen and the thief's taken off, in either case, you go before the judges to see whether to have put his hand unto his neighbor's goods. In other words, whatever the judges respond, that's what has to happen. So if they deem, well, this guy's not reliable, so he's got to pay the restitution as if it were a theft. Or even if it was something where, hey, we're not accusing you of stealing, but it was placed into your hands and you lost it. So the horse was tied to your house. You said you'd watch it. The horse is gone. We don't have a horse thief. All we know is that the horse is missing. So you're responsible because they don't have it anymore. So that's pretty much how it works. I like how it's laid out here because it really emphasizes the idea of responsibility here. That if you're going to do something for your neighbor, that you're really supposed to do something for your neighbor. You're supposed to help them out. You're supposed to love them. And anyway, so we see how that's laid out. We transfer now into trespasses of possessions or issues having to do with possession. So for all manner of trespass, whether it be ox or ass or sheep or raiment or any manner of lost thing, which another challengeth to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, whom the judges shall condemn. He shall pay double unto his neighbor. So basically you've got two people who are laying claim to something. All right, let's say some of you have your cars parked out front, and then I could just say, hey, that's my car. I could just make the accusation that you're trying to leave here with my car, even though I know and you know that you drove it here and parked it there, that I could be a party and you could be a party and we both have an accusation. And the bottom line is, how do you know? How do you know? So that comes before the judges here specifically. And at that point, the judges make the decision. Now, to the one person's benefit, you could just say, well, I have a receipt with my name that says I bought this car or this ox or whatever. And then the person that's trying to swindle you out of your, what's yours, laying hold of your claim, so to speak, then they have to pay double. So in restitution of whatever the value was. So I think that it's awesome here because it prevents fraudulent stealing and false accusation here. Remember number 9, don't bear false witness, and someone bearing false witness in order to get something for themselves here, it prevents that. Moving on to verse 10, if a man deliver unto his neighbor an ass or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep, and it die, or be hurt, or driven away, no man seeing it, go on to the next verse here, then shall an oath of the Lord be between them both, that he hath not put his hand unto his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept thereof, and he shall not make it good. So basically what's going on here? So first of all, in verse 10, it says, if he delivers anything to his neighbor, it's an animal, it's a beast, something to keep, and then it dies, or it says is driven away, and no man seeing it. So it die, or be hurt, or is driven away. So death or injury, or it disappears. Perhaps this, sheep runs off. If a man deliver it to his neighbor and then it goes running off, who's responsible for it? That's basically what the question is. Who's responsible? Or you deliver it to your neighbor and then it gets hurt. Well, who's responsible? Who's going to take care of it at that point? Or just runs off on its own? Who's bears the responsibility? Well, it goes on in verse 11, and it tells us, let's see if I can turn the page here, then shall an oath of the Lord be between them both, that he hath not put his hand unto his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept thereof, and he shall not make it good. In other words, they come together, and so you give somebody an animal, and then it runs off, and it's under their responsibility, but they're like, hey, it died while I had it, or it was injured while I had it. They both come before the judges. And then they make an oath before the Lord. They basically pray, God, if either one of us are in the wrong, then it's your responsibility to clarify, kill the person, make it right, deal with this person, because we don't know how this happened. So it's your responsibility, Lord, we're trusting you to do this. But otherwise, then they don't hold each other accountable at that point. And not only that, but the second part is the one person doesn't make restitution. Okay, but if it's stolen from him, he shall make restitution. So see, again, this is an interesting thing here. It's like if you deliver unto a neighbor this animal and it dies or it's hurt or anything like that, it's just like, hey, you know, we didn't know this was going to happen. And so neither one of us should be held responsible. But then it goes on and it says, but if it be stolen from him, he shall make restitution unto the owner thereof. In other words, let's say it's stolen and the guy who had the animal, so it goes from this person to me, and I have the animal and then it gets stolen from me, then I have to make restitution for the loss of the animal because it's my responsibility. And even though it's stolen, we don't know if it was somebody else that stole it or if I've just taken the animal and hidden it away and said it was stolen. So in either case, the bottom line is there's restitution that needs to be paid to the original owner. So moving on here, if it be torn to pieces, then let him bring it for witness, and he shall not make good that which was torn. Where it says not make good, that basically means he doesn't need to make restitution. He doesn't need to make payment. So if it be torn in pieces, so let's say that the animal is there, and then let's say I've got a sheep. I have this sheep. Let's go with a different animal, something that works. So let's say it's an ox, and they've been working in the field. I paid the owner some money for that, and the ox is working in the field. But then while I'm bringing the ox in, or while it's still in my possession, some wolves come out and kill the ox. Well, it's not the owner's responsibility. It's my responsibility to make restitution and care for it because it's been torn in pieces. Let him bring it for witness. In other words, you need to show that it was torn in pieces, not just, well, that ox, I don't know where it went. It was all consumed. It was all eaten. Well, that would be outright theft. So that would be a different issue requiring restitution. But if it's been killed, then it's saying here that he shall not make good that which was torn. So basically, he doesn't have to pay restitution for something that was injured. Okay. So are you all still with me? Now we get into, another aspect of, borrowing here. If a man borrow aught, or borrow an animal of his neighbor, and it be hurt or die, the owner thereof being not with it, he shall surely make it good. So, well, let me read verse 15 also. But if the owner thereof be with it, he shall not make it good. It is a hired thing. It came for his hire. So basically what this is saying is, an owner has possession of it, and, if it's hurt or dies on its own, then the owner, it says the owner thereof being not with it, he shall make it good. So basically there's a payment that needs to take place. In other words, if you pay for an animal, I guess another analogy for this would be if you rent a car and it breaks down, then the original owner has to, take care of it. They've got to deal with it. And so it's not under the accountability of the neighbor at this point. But if the owner thereof be with it, he shall not make it good if it be a hired thing. So let's say you gave it back and then it died. Then at that point, the neighbor who borrowed it, they don't make restitution for it because it was actually part of the usage of that animal. Does that make sense? So let's put it back into a car rental idea. So I rent a car from someone. I pay them to use the car. I use the car. There's no problem with it. I get through. But then I return it, and then within 5 minutes of it being returned, the engine blows up. They go out to drive it again. Well, that's not the renter's problem, because they paid for the usage of it, and so as a result, then the owner who has it and rented it out, that's their responsibility. There's no restitution that needs to be paid here. So instead of thinking in terms of a car, though, we're talking about oxen and donkeys and livestock. So, okay. We're at verse 16, and now it starts to get, I don't know, we're not very agricultural, so we may have some 4-H ties here being in Kentucky, but we're not really in this world so much. But the rest of it, there are some things that might hit closer to home, and not that the others didn't have application, but you have to sort of think about what the application is outside of oxen, because I don't know anybody in church that owns an ox. So it's just, I don't think anybody at church owns an ox or a donkey for that matter. So, but we still need to apply the principles and figure out what it's saying. Now, in verse 16, it says, if a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. So basically, the word here, entice, literally means to seduce. And that could be to be charming, to draw her in one way or the other, and then to lie with her. So basically, he has convinced her that he is worthy of her and that she can make a commitment to him without having actually entered into marriage. Now, we know that you don't do that, but human nature and the way that things work, people do covenants and transactions, if you want to call it that, based upon, without doing things in the right way. Somebody falls in love and that they want to make a commitment to one another, and it's done all out of wedlock. So in this case, this man has enticed or seduced this woman that is not betrothed, and lies with her, and he shall surely, so what's he got to do? He needs to endow her to be his wife. So basically, he needs to pay the dowry. There's a consequence for this sort of activity, that the dowry needs to be paid, and that he needs to take her as his wife. He can't, in other words, this sort of eliminates the idea of some of what we have in our culture now, of a lot of the, premarital sex and activity and dates and so on. The whole idea of dating in general is suspect, because it gets you into this mode of making a commitment to somebody and going in part into that relationship, only to come to a point where you just say, well, never mind, and you both back out, and it sort of reinforces more the idea of divorce. It establishes a pattern for divorce, because if you do that a couple times as a dating person, you have a couple people that you've dated, then you're really sort of, you're more acquainted not with commitment, but with severing a commitment and not seeing it all the way through and being all in with unconditional love for this person. It's very based on condition. And so those matters are all supposed to be dealt with in advance, and especially in biblical times, it was arranged with parents. We have perhaps more liberty now, but sometimes the liberty that we exercise is exercised in foolishness and without prudence and without being circumspect and having a good idea of the implications. You watch a show on TV and you've got little kids who are, 5 and, 2 little kids, and they're already in the show trying to make 2 5-year-olds into a couple. Or let's go a little older, let's say 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds into these little couples, and oh, they're so cute and all of that. That's where our world is now. So without getting too much onto a soapbox having to do with that. If a man entices a maid and he lies with her, then he's committed to pay the dowry for her. That there's no casual encounters that take place. That there's a full dowry that needs to be paid. And that dowry is based upon the price that the father has established. And the father can establish, if it's depending upon what the type of father it is, they could just say, well, there's no dowry. Basically, that is like saying, at least in that culture, that my daughter isn't really worth anything. And otherwise, they established dowries during that time based upon the investment perhaps that they actually paid for or have paid for that daughter. So if you think of it in our terms, it's just like, we raise our daughters, and they go through certain schooling and so on, and then they have certain doctor's appointments, and then they have their teeth fixed, and they have their eyes done, and they have their hair done, and all of that. And you think about the investment of a family into a single person, specifically a daughter, and the dowry is $100,000. If you want to marry my daughter, then you need to pay this dowry, and it can be very expensive. But it's coming from the idea that this girl, this maiden, is not without value, but that she is actually in very high value, and that the person who's going to, her suitor is going to be the person who can pay the dowry and who values her and works for her and has made a commitment and investment in this young lady. So in addition, the dowries are also set up where that money would then, in turn, I think I made reference to this last week, but the money in turn would go into the father's household, and that money should be set aside so that if there's a problem that takes place, that the daughter is cared for the rest of her life, because once she's married, and then if she's divorced, if some problem comes up, then nobody else would marry her, and she would need to be supported. And if the father and mother passed away, and there wasn't an older brother especially to care for her, then she needs to be cared for. So that's all part of the dowry exchange. So you have a person here who's coming in and enticing this girl to get something from her, and she's giving herself away in this regard, but it's not without a cost. And that's what's being said. And it goes to the degree that if you're going to do that, then you are going to pay the dowry. And not only are you going to pay the dowry, but you're going to follow through with the commitment to be married to this girl. Now, in the next verse, though, it says that if the father utterly refused to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins. So basically the father could just say, that guy's a scoundrel, you're not going to marry my daughter. But it's all in the father's court here. And so if he sees this guy who's seduced his daughter, he's going to say, look, this is the cost, this is the dowry that you need to pay, but you don't get to marry my daughter. Hit the road. And if we implemented some of these things today, I think in many ways we would have fewer problems with premarital relations and date rapes and even just the excessive dating and the dating sites and all of that. That if there was the understood value of what a person is to make a commitment to them, as opposed to now it's just, hey, maybe that's the benefit of the 60s and the free love generation and decade, that we wouldn't. I really think that there would be an impact upon our society that wouldn't be. We wouldn't have such a high divorce rate for one, and there would be much more commitment. And anyway, I think you're with me on this. And so it is an interesting thing. It's not that we can't implement these things now. Another way of putting this is somebody could be, a couple could be arranged, And so what the son was supposed to do, and this is the prophetic side, was that arrangement was made, that betrothal occurred, and then the son went to his father's house and he prepared a place for his bride. And we see that taking place having to do with Jesus. He goes and prepares a place and where there's many mansions, because his bride is the church, and there's many mansions. And we know that the cool aspect of this from a prophetic side is that the Lord, when those mansions are prepared and that his bride is prepared, he comes and he calls out to her, and then the bride is always supposed to be ready. And when he calls out to her and she hears that call, they're reunited somewhere in between the destination of where the bride is and where the Father's house is. And this is what we learn from the rapture, that the Lord doesn't come a second time, but he comes and calls us, and we meet him in the air, and then we return with him for that bridal chamber time with him. So that's how it's supposed to be. And I think that we can still implement some of these things. Oh, one closing statement or point about this to the guys. I already talked about the girls a little bit. First of all, don't be seduced. Don't be enticed. Be wise. Trust in your Father. And if you don't have a father who's trustworthy, trust in your heavenly Father for these things. And don't... Anyway. But for the guys, that, if you're a guy and you don't have a job and you don't have a place to live, you're not in any position to be marrying anyone or even starting off dating or getting into a relationship. That simple. If you don't have a house to go to and you don't have a job or money or anything built up, just set it aside, the idea of getting into a relationship. And that should really be the critical thing is, part of getting married is that you're going to be caring for this bride and you're going to be the person who has that responsibility. So you need to step on up and start working on that. That might mean that, okay, before I can get a house or a job, I need to go to school. I need to finish my education. I need to get a trade. And then from there, I need to start saving money in case there is a dowry, even though there really aren't these days. But that dad, I can speak for myself, that dad is going to look for what's going on with this young man. Are they preparing for anything? Or are they just trying to entice me and entice my daughter? So just be mindful. Do you have a place, a house, or is it just some shack? Is it just some apartment? So some sort of thing that there's no real commitment, or are you making a commitment and are you showing that commitment? And so enough about that. I won't spend that much time on the rest of these, although they're pretty crazy. We get into verse 18, and it says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Okay, so we're talking about a witch, someone who's part of the occult. They are to be killed. We're not going to suffer it. We're not going to put up with it. There's no tolerance for witches. No tolerance for the occult. No tolerance for Ouija boards. No tolerance for horoscopes. No tolerance for fortune cookies. Oh, they're so cool. I even see my lotto numbers there. No tolerance for it. Everything having to do with the occult that we see from the scripture, we see that it's not that it doesn't have power, but that we acknowledge that it can and does have power, and we don't suffer it. We don't have any tolerance for it. We get rid of it. And so that even carries over, into the Disney Channel and some of the nonsense and all of the stuff that's on there. All of the things that deal with witchcraft, all of the things that deal with the occults. It even comes down to, I think, when we want to be sensitized, or we choose, Lord, to be sensitized to those things which are pagan. And I made reference to it a couple teachings ago, but even the idea of a pentagram, we know pentagrams are evil when they're turned upside down. That's the occultic side of a pentagram. But when they're right side up and it's a star, that's saying basically that we're counting on good luck or good occultism for prosperous things. So the stars on our flag are not really good. It's tying into paganism and the power of the occult in order to drive forth or to have the strength and the power of the demonic side or the occultic side to move forward. So Captain America with his little circle, I think I talked about that a few weeks ago, where that circle is to magnify something. So in the bad occult, you have the upside down, the Church of Satan, the upside down star with a circle around it, right? Very crazy stuff. Those are all symbols to try to emphasize the occult in the bad sense, but we use it in a good sense also. Putting a circle around something brings emphasis, it magnifies it. And you could look at a lot of different icons all around us. Icons all around that have circles around them. And it isn't just an artistic circle, but it's something that's trying to magnify or draw our attention into that. And icons just in general, it's something that we walk by sight, not by faith. It's trying to draw us in, trying to identify based upon an icon, something along that line, trying to tell us. You remember when Prince had his, he became the artist formerly known as Prince, and he just had an icon? Because that icon was supposed to represent Prince, his life, his personality, all of that. And that's what happens with icons. Nikes, Under Armours, all of that sort of stuff. It's like it's just a UA, but it's representing an entire company and a mindset and so on. That's the downside of those things. So the issue here, again, we're talking about witchcraft, but it's all part of the occult. We need to get to a point where we say, Lord, help me to have that sensitivity to things which are pagan and occultic, and where we're not, following into those things, and to be mindful of it, and then to not suffer them, to have a no tolerance attitude, to have a conviction about those types of things. And some things we can't necessarily get away from, because it's like the American flag. How do we get away from that? But it's iconic, isn't it not? So it represents our nation, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the people. And we look at it, and yet we need to be careful, because we can be, adopting an attitude that is based more upon paganism than upon what it is that makes our country great, is the fact that you've got people that stand for truth and righteousness and goodness, and that the tie-ins to those things are, Lord willing anyway, established based upon God's laws and who He is, and that we gather together to be governed, and we elect to be governed for the protection of one another as citizens, and we're looking out for each other. Those are the things that make the United States awesome, that it's not a dictatorial rule, but that it's really is a we the people sort of mindset. So that said, how did you get there from not suffer a witch to live? So it just has to do with the occult, but all of these 18, 19, and 20 are really, they're the abominations that are found here. Whosoever lieth with the beast shall surely be put to death. So it's just talking about perversions here. I mean, it's just gross stuff. Gross stuff. It's a perversion. They should be put to death. Just put to death. I won't elaborate on that. I think we're all in the same, we don't need to know much more about that. But we know it when we see it or when we hear about it, and we know what God thinks of it. He that sacrificeth unto any god, save unto the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. So basically, there's no sacrifices to any other god. No others. You're supposed to be put to death if you sacrifice to any other god but the Lord on high. And so again, all the 18, 19, and 20 are the abominations. Okay, so we'll wrap up on these next ones here. Thou shalt not vex or mistreat a stranger, nor oppress him. ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. In other words, if there's someone that's not familiar. Maybe they're not familiar because they just haven't been in the area. They're totally a stranger, or maybe they're not familiar having to do with how they talk. I remember when we first moved here, people were saying, "You're not from around here, are you?" Got a lot of those types of things. And that was with the mindset or an attitude of mistreatment. It was like, we're here and you're there, and that's how we're going to keep it. There's no assimilation. And that can happen for because of a lot of different things. It could be race, gender, whatever, nationalities, all sorts of, ethnicities, all of these types of things. Could be age-based and so on. Well, we're not supposed to mistreat. We don't mistreat or vex a stranger, nor oppress him. It'd be like, okay, you're the new guy at work, so we're going to haze you. You don't do that. And no matter how much fun it may be, or no matter how much it may seem that, well, they did it to me, so I'm going to do it to them, that mindset, no, there's no foundation for it. We're not to oppress. We're not to mistreat. You were strangers in the land of Egypt, and I like how there's that reminder. Look, you guys were the outsiders for a time. You know what it's like. So, okay, verse 22, widows and orphans here. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. Pretty straightforward. Don't afflict them. Don't mess with them. Why? Because God knows. Because it goes on in the next two verses. If thou afflict them in any wise or in any way, and they cry out at all unto me, I will surely hear their cry. So you remember when there was that issue, when there's a problem and you bring that oath, both people, there's this dispute, and both people take that oath before the Lord. They knew that God was going to come down upon somebody who's guilty. So they knew it. And the same thing is true here. God's saying, look, don't afflict a widow or a fatherless child, because if you afflict any of them in any way, and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry. Now, you could just say, well, I don't believe that. You don't have to believe it, but that doesn't mean it's not true. Just because you don't believe what it is, it doesn't mean that it's not true. So the speed of gravity, right, or the acceleration, was it 9.8 meters per second squared or something like that? It's something to that, along that line. Well, you don't have to believe that, but it's still going to happen that way. It's still true. Maybe you can flap your arms and create enough wind resistance that it's now 9.9 meters per second instead of 9.8. But it's not going, whether you believe in it or not doesn't mean that it's not going to take place. So in this case, the person that afflicts a widow or a fatherless child, they cry out, God will surely hear their cry. And my wrath shall wax hot, verse 24, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. So, the Lord is laying it on the line, and he's saying, look, you mess with a widow or an orphan, and guess what? Your wife is going to be a widow, and your children are going to be orphans. He's just coming down with that. And, again, someone could do this and say, I don't believe it. I wouldn't mess with that. I wouldn't bet against God in this regard. Verse 25, if thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not to him be as a usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury. So basically it's saying, look, if you're going to lend money to somebody, you're not charging interest. You're not doing that. You're not taking that money from a brother. Now, again, it's trying to keep the idea. It says, well, let me be more specific. If thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee. So he's keeping it within the family, so to speak. And so it's a little bit like the wrongness would be if I don't know, if someone within the church or somebody within my actual family, if we needed some cash, maybe you found yourself in a situation, the gas bill, gas and electric was really high, and you're under, or like we heard, maybe there's some dental work and you need to borrow the money for it, that you don't charge them interest on it. You just don't do that. And sadly, that's what happens in a lot of families. There's a lot of that sort of stuff that goes on, but you're not supposed to. No usury. If thou at all take thy neighbor's raiment to pledge, thou shalt deliver it unto him by that the sun goeth down. In other words, so if there's, I don't know, let's see, you take raiment as a pledge. The example I could think of is, let's say, because I had a situation like this come up. I forgot my wallet. I was traveling out to my in-laws' house, and when I came back, I realized I don't have my wallet, and my car is almost out of gas. So I was thinking, what am I going to do? How do I do that? So one of the thoughts is, could you go to the gas station and give them a watch or something and just say, look, I'll be back to pay for it, but I just need, $10 worth of gas in order to get home. And then I'll come back and make it right. Or we can just do this deal, a watch for $10 worth of gas, whatever you think it's valued at. This is what pawn shops are all about, that you make that exchange. So now, if that's something that occurs and the person is so poor that they have to, like, literally give the shirt that's off their back because they need to get money for, they need to, make some sort of deal here, that by the end of the night, you give it back to them because it's all that they have to keep warm. It's all that they have to, keep them from, well, it goes on, verse 27, for that is his covering only, it's his raiment for his skin, wherein shall he sleep. And it shall come to pass when he crieth unto me that I will hear, for I am gracious. So again, it would seem like, well, yeah, this totally makes sense, but you still had people that were looking to make a buck or would leverage something like this over somebody else. And it's just like they don't have anything and they're leveraging it. So it's the idea that if somebody's in need and they make a deal, that you're still trying to look out for them so that they can still live and have some level of comfort and survivability. That you're not sticking it to them, you're not making their life extra miserable. If all they have is the last thing that they have to try to make this payment in order to get the next thing, maybe it's food, maybe they don't have any food, so they've got to make this exchange, that you don't make their lives miserable. You're looking out for them, that you're loving here. So it's sad that you have to put these sorts of laws in place, but the human nature says, if we walk by the Spirit, then it's a spirit of love and grace and so on. But if we walk by the flesh, then a lot of gnarly, nasty things happen in the flesh, which, at the worst is these abominations, 18 through 20 here. So, all right, the last couple verses here. Thou shalt not revile the gods, nor curse the ruler of thy people. So there's no blasphemy, no cursing of rulers. What's interesting here is that it could be assumed, thou shalt not revile the Lord thy God. So no blasphemy against the God. But it doesn't really read that way. It reads like you're not stirring controversy of just blaspheming, that there's this attitude of blasphemy or cursing that's going on. And so, of course, we know that we only worship God and everything else is blasphemy, that, if we... anyway, but I think it's more of an attitude. Sometimes people are just blasphemous. They're blasphemous in attitude and response and conduct. And they're cursing. They're just ticked off at, the man. The man's always getting stuff. He's always beating me. He's always winning. And it's like, nope. Don't do it. And then first fruits, verse 29. Thou shalt not delay to offer the first of thy ripe fruits or of thy liquors. The firstborn of thy sons shalt thou give unto me. So again, first fruits. The firstborn son is dedicated unto God. They're given over unto God. Or thy liquors, and it's just like, yeah, there's liquors in the Bible, yes. And the first fruits of that are supposed to be dedicated. And likewise, the first fruits. The thing that's interesting about first fruits, if you grow anything, it's that you're not really sure whether it's going to have fruit after that first fruit. You could grow, you could have a plant or a field full of things growing, and that first fruit comes, and you give of that. But that could be it. There could be a hailstorm, it could be locusts, or it could just be, a drought that happens. Anything can happen. So it all comes down to, it's a step of faith that you give the first fruits. It's a step of faith. It could be your only son, but you offer him and you say, God, this is your son. Just like in Egypt, where you saved the firstborn of all, but I am dedicating this son to you. And the first fruits. And then as it goes on, the last verse here, likewise, last two verses, likewise shalt thou do with thine oxen and with thine sheep. 7 days it will be with his dam or mothers, and on the 8th day thou shalt give it to me. So again, even oxen, the first fruit, it's just a mindset, it's an attitude. And practically you can, we're not agricultural, but you could just say, okay, I know what what a paycheck is. I know what it could be as that comes in. Most of us know, we may work in a situation where we already know what that paycheck is, or if we're self-employed, we know what that amount is that's coming in. So it's just a first fruits attitude, and it's unto God. God, I just thank you. I don't know that anything is going to come after this, but I'm grateful for your provision. And it's, again, on the front end. And you're trusting God for the rest. But it comes down to the gratitude on the front end. Okay, and then the last verse, ye shall be holy men unto me. Just for the record, I'm going to say this really quick. There's a lot of pastors that would spend as much time on this as I spent on some of these other verses. So you could just say, wow, Pastor Rocky's, the whole first fruits thing. I mean, they'll bring that up, once every month, because they're just trying to drive revenue. So this is a principle that I feel strongly about, but not to the degree that I would, browbeat a church into. So, but it's important. It's a step of faith, and it's, the first thing that you do. It's like the first thing you do when you wake up. Praise the Lord. Thank you, God, for another day and breath in my lungs. Okay, verse 31. And ye shall be holy men unto me, neither shall ye eat any flesh that is torn of beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs. Now, basically, you're holy and you trust God. You're a first fruits person. That if something's been, run over, if it's roadkill, if it's something that's been torn by wolves and it's out there, you just give it to the dogs. Okay, just continue to trust. You don't have to be desperate. God looks out for us. We don't have to eat things that are torn. And to wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. He'll take care of us. He'll care for us, and he's watching over us. And with that, Lord Jesus, we are thankful that you call us to this very last verse, that we should be holy men unto you.